We're now 5 days after the day before, and as one Steam reviewer put it, turns out this is a real game. Kind of wish it wasn't. Yes, one of the most wish-listed games on Steam of all time hit a peak of a 20% user score. Then the company behind the game announced their own closure just a few days after launch, and the game has been pulled from sale in what's going to go down in history as one of the most visibly bad game launches of all time. The Day Before from Fantastic has actually came out, but if we consider the controversy after controversy, is it really any surprise? Especially as later on in today's video, we'll have some footage that looks like it's from the game Splinter's to show you, and that clues in just about everything you need to know from this game's launch. I even have a little bit of a connection to the earliest days of the development of Anthem. Yeah, you probably didn't think we'd be going there. But this is an end that is equal parts every emotion from just about everybody involved. Now, I've got a quick word for you. We are slowly but surely building up our home at bellular.ghost.io, and over there our members get exclusive content like Loading Screen, which we publish 5 days a week, as well as early access videos and zero ads. Right now, about 0.125% of our monthly unique viewers are members over there. And if we can get that number to just 1%, it will make a fundamental difference to what we're about to do. The link to check things out is just down below. But okay, let's get going. Number 1, the launch. After the drama of multiple delays, the entire situation with unpaid volunteers handling translations and community management for the game, the legal saga around the very name of the game, and then the very weird statements decrying those who had doubted them, The Day Before has finally released. And that's without me even mentioning things like some of their marketing being a little bit sketchy. I mean, does this kind of look like the typesetting and the vibe of The Last of Us? Something that, of course, would clash with the yoga pants and Lamborghini, or at least very fast sports car looking gameplay footage that they've shown off rather recently. It's bizarre. Technically, it's not like the game sold poorly, and you may be wondering, how has a game managed to be number 2 on the global top sellers of Steam at $40 a pop, and somehow the company is gone within 4 days? What does this mean about the money, you may ask? And that's actually where I'm going to be able to take you a little bit behind the curtain, because I know what the Steam backend actually looks like and how some of these numbers really work. And to the hype, nearly 500,000 people were watching concurrently on Twitch across various different channels. The game itself had a player concurrency of 38,000, but that of course is where the trouble started, because the servers absolutely started just falling to pieces. This is bad news, but of course it is far from crazy. We've all seen big game, servers just can't handle it. One of those things where sustained load and peak pressure at one point are very different things for an infrastructure to handle. And as much as some may suggest that these server problems are basically just a way to get by the Steam refund policy, I don't think that overall is it, because at least in situations like this, Valve has continually shown that they do make exceptions where it makes sense, such as a circumstance just like this one. But the thing that really got people is expectations versus reality, and we can even go to the Steam page of it. Now, this is the current Steam page. This is, well, it ain't current anymore, but this is what it said. Post-apocalyptic open world MMO survival. Those are all words that convey information to people. That it has a beautiful and richly detailed city. Enter tall skyscrapers, business centers, massive malls, grand stadiums, and more. Again there, it's not that these are things that feature in the game's landscapes. The key word there is enter. And with that in mind, we get to the public reaction, which obviously was quite brutal. You do have all of these scenes that would take place in the sort of like the main little hub area that initially would make you think that it's going somewhere, but slowly what happened is things began to dawn on people. That is, if they didn't, you know, just die immediately, as happened to this one user over on X. As we then take a look, we find, oh, this is in fact not an open world survival MMO as its users have came to understand it. Because bugs and crashes are one thing, but a store page not actually reflecting the game being sold, that is another thing. This is not an MMO in the way that people understand MMOs. It's not open world in the way that people understand open world, and it's not even the third-person zombie loot shooter that people were expecting from those initial gameplay videos. Now, here we have got 2 videos from IGN. So first up, you can see a lot of this, sort of vehicular gameplay that's going on, some of these more detailed scenes that are going on while the player's doing some scavenging, right? And overall, you do see as what looks to be a sort of little slice of gameplay that's been cordoned off. Seems pretty successful. It does seem like what a lot of people would really enjoy, where they can go and, yes, pick up their Pepsi. Now, within this footage is also something else. We have this vehicular gameplay here that very much is reminiscent of Splintires, and if you don't know what Splintires is, basically it is a sort of mud and just rough terrain driving simulator. It's got pretty damn incredible vehicles and just a level of physics that, well, you don't get your own car stuck in mud, but it turns out if you're doing that in a video game, it's pretty damn fun. Now, the point here is, we've only seen these. At no point do we know how these actually tie together, because you might look at this and you might think, okay, so you've got this kind of simulated driving going on. Now, what are you then immediately going to think? You're going to think, well, how do zombies work with that? Can I be in a situation where I'm stuck in the mud and a bunch of zombies are coming for my car? Now, if you are then having to do that as the developer, number one, remembering that this is all, multiplayer game, all happening on a server, it's got to look right for all the different clients that are involved. What about the systems that handle how do the zombies work in the mud? How do they move around in the mud? What are their animations like when they are in the mud? All of those different things. Again, if there's a situation here with other players and you're going to involve some combat, how does that work? Because doing one little microsystem where a car can go around in the mud in this very impressive way, that's really cool. Maybe it's something where they've followed a tutorial of how some other developers have been able to do it. Maybe there's some sort of asset that they've downloaded that has allowed them to do this, or maybe they've developed themselves in-house. An example of a video game that absolutely suffered from this is Anthem, because in Anthem's earliest days, it had so many internal technical prototypes of things that they could do that were pretty damn mind-blowing. And that's ultimately where you kind of end up with a problem, because if you're taking all of your cool stuff and then you are showing your cool stuff to people, you are rocketing all the way up the wish lists to literally being the most wishlisted game on Steam. What happens when it turns out those things are just little development prototypes that, yes, technically exist in a version of your game, but not the version that you can ship, because having this one demo is very different from having a whole world where this system works as a part of that whole world, and all of these things work together to ultimately form a real video game. Now, this is all stuff that was 2 years ago. So if you've wondered why people sort of saw this situation and wishlisted the game, just think about it for a second. They have, a logo and everything that makes people think of the likes of The Last of Us. They have this very dramatic shot of their main character's face that looks, it looks like it's a grim situation. It absolutely speaks to the survival genre. Now, I would like you to think about what this marketing looks like. Think about how that marketing makes you feel. And then think about the, the yoga pants and Lamborghinis direction that they went with some of their more recent marketing for the game. And you start to kind of realize those things look like they're different games. Those things look like they're happening in different versions of the same world. They do not look like they are part of the same thing. I suppose in a way it's like you could have Grand Theft Auto, the very, very, let's do a serious satire, and then GTA Online hijinks. But it's almost like that in how much those two things don't really fit together. Now, of course, if you take a look at this footage that was 1 year ago, you do see them showing off a suburban environment blending into the city and way more explorable buildings. So as a player, what happens is you obviously see this and then you extrapolate, because you are expecting this to be a representative slice. Now, let's stop. What is this? This is an open world game. That broadly means for a player, they think they can go over to one of those those skyscrapers. And maybe based on the level of building interaction that's going on here, they think they can go into those skyscrapers. And maybe the players will kind of understand, well, maybe the skyscraper's just that big that it kind of has to be procedural, but whatever. The point is, give me a situation, you put zombies in it, some resources, away I go in this grounded feeling survival MMO game. Again, remembering they said enter tall skyscrapers, business centers, massive malls, grand stadiums, and more. And this is really where things are absolutely just falling apart for them. Now, if you take a look at the first 22 minutes released on launch day here, of course, to IGN, we do see the intro of the game where you're basically in the sort of settlement. And the settlement gameplay, broadly speaking, people seem to think that it's fine, you know? You can look at your different weapons, you can talk to various different characters, all kind of makes sense. There's then this system of building your own land plot, and again, that's a pretty neat feature. However, a lot of people were struggling to see how this feature actually ties into the rest of the overall game. Then, of course, we go back to the settlement, and then we've got the open world combat. That, yeah, is quite strange, because it turns out, rather than being the open world survival MMO that people expected, what it in fact is an extraction shooter, and we can see what is said here. Now you can explore the city and its surroundings in search of valuable items to sell. Make sure to bring enough supplies to avoid getting into a desperate situation. Beware of the infected and other survivors. To prevent losing your items, store the most valuable ones in storage or your protective case. So it's very much just laying out the mechanics of how this is going to work. It says once you've found enough valuable items, head to the evacuation points to return to Woodbury. Other players may be waiting for you there, so be careful. So obviously, extraction game. Now the thing is, in a way, you could say that this could be part of an overall MMO experience, but to maybe some other people who took a look at this, saw, oh my god, is this like gameplay mechanics of The Last of Us? But then maybe those players are also thinking about the likes of Rust. Again, we just have a massive example here of expectations absolutely not being managed. So there's a certain amount of scoping that has got to happen with every game as it moves from a prototyping and creative exploration sort of end of things through to actual full production. Because really what happens in full production in an ideal case is you've kind of hit design lock and now you're just making the damn thing. Because every major change away from your plan, well, you're gonna have lost work, you're gonna have assets you can't use. Just doesn't really work. So you can see how, based on all the parts that they had, they have pretty much just cobbled together something shippable. And look, when your goal is shippable after all the drama that's happened, what do you think is going to happen to your Splinter style mud system that's really cool in a demo, but ultimately you don't really have a gameplay loop around and you haven't been able to implement in the vast majority of the game's play spaces or anything like that? Well, you've probably got to scrap it. And this is how survival MMO moves to extraction shooter, and it launches into early access. But generally speaking, people, they think early access means, you know, it's the full game-ish, but, you know, it's kind of systemically complete, but not content complete. They don't expect a different genre. And I think what makes this a little bit more confusing is what they posted before launch, where they said, please don't accuse us of scamming, that's not true. We didn't take a penny from anyone. Please don't accuse us of an asset flip, that's also not true. Our team worked day and night for 5 years to make our dream game a reality. Please don't underestimate our work, it wasn't easy. We are like you, we worked hard. We're incredibly happy that our game will finally see the light of day for everyone to explore. That is certainly a interesting thing to say. For me, the big thing is this is obviously them being aware of what everybody is saying, because just about everything that's went on has looked really suspicious and tone deaf and chaotic. They basically haven't communicated with people, so all of this happened. Then Fantastic have had their own reactions. In a normal company, of course, what will end up happening is there'll be a bad launch. The community team will then just have to provide updates to customers while the developers try to fix the situation. But instead, what happened here is the Twitter account just was silent. And then the Discord that was recommended on their Steam page was closed down. And as captured by PC Games at the time, the mods of the server were met with a deluge, of course, of bug reports and complaints following the launch. So much so that they basically locked it down because the complaints started to vastly outweigh the bug reports, and then the whole situation rapidly became completely unmoderatable for them, because obviously when you have, I mean, 500,000 people watching on Twitch, you are the #1. Everyone was kind of watching you with popcorn anyway situation. I mean, other than, say, Skull and Bones coming out and people having criticisms of it, like, what else is more of a, to use, I suppose, a old word that's no longer in fashion and is from, you know, older parts of the internet. You know, this is the absolute sort of lolcow game of the whole situation, right? In the way that, I know there's the whole phenomenon of Chris Chan. You'll see the Chris Chan update videos. This is kind of like a video game Chris Chan, and it's a very different story, and I don't really want to touch on the Chris Chan thing, because honestly, it does make me deeply uncomfortable what's going on with all of that, but just in the way that the day before itself rapidly became a spectator sport. And of course it did. It was a pretty damn amazing spectator sport to watch. You got a new update every few months, it was drama, it was spice, and everybody got some content out of it at the end of the day. It's just the way that these things work. Now, here is a message posted in the Discord this morning. Head moderator basically said this: I understand your disappointment, you know, of those who were expecting a very different product. The team's been working and modifying the game for 5 years. The project has become what it has become. However, this is not the final point, but only the beginning of a journey. So he'd said that right in the morning. Obviously, to say that that statement did not go down well would itself be quite an understatement. Because as much as the words there were, this is the beginning of, you know, of the journey now that it's live, well, what people then noticed is there's a lot of hidden and deleted content in basically the majority of the videos that are like, you know, a year older on their YouTube channel. Loads of stuff is gone. There's also been attempts to smooth out the Steam page to make it more consistent with what the game actually is. And then, of course, as PC games and note, there are multiple user-generated tags that have been removed as well. Those include user-generated tags like MMO, which are obviously, you know, those are gone. The store description itself, though, was kind of not altered, so it was all a very weird situation. I mean, presumably this is so that whenever people clicked on the MMO tag, they didn't get this because it's not a bloody MMO. Now, all of this is looking very suspicious. Then Nick of course, Second Wind, who's been very skeptical of this whole project from a while, just, well, went and gave everybody the big comparison for their trailer. So, the announcement trailer, the off-road features, the countryside, lakeside campfire, all of those videos that were showing off the open world content, those are all gone. Problem is, though, they're still up on Nvidia and IGN's channels, and that means that it looks like they're trying to hide their past, but completely incompetently, because all their actions do is shine a light on what didn't happen and how they didn't own up before launch and say, hey, listen, here's the deal. I'm really glad we didn't take pre-orders because we have not been able to make as large an experience as we intended. But they didn't do anything like that, which of course is perfectly in character for the level of really awful communications that have followed this project. And I think that's the thing, especially if there's potential for like a language barrier. You know, it's a dev working right now with a very massive, you know, sort of like English speaking or sort of Western audience who, you know, who are not from there. You know, you do want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but when it does descend into full on, like, this just looks like we are scrubbing our YouTube page. Now look, they could say, we've removed a bunch of videos in our YouTube page because we can no longer promote the game because that's not what we shipped. But if you do that, you have to make people know that's what you're doing. Not that any of this would matter, because along with sympathy vanishing, so too has the company itself. They released a statement out of the blue saying the game has failed financially and they lack the funds to continue. All income will be used to pay off debts to our partners. At the moment, the future of the day before and prop night is unknown, but servers will remain operational. They ended their statement by reminding people they didn't take anybody's pre-order money, right? There was no public money going into this game project before the actual launch day of the game, and they said they have released games for 5 years over their last 8 years of existence. So kind of proving, like, basically, look, we were a real developer actually making games, and this one just completely screwed up. Now, at this point, boom, right? Boom goes the internet. Chaos erupts absolutely everywhere. Yes, the word scam certainly appeared a hell of a lot. Now, the publisher Matona, then, they got involved and basically said that they are working with Steam and getting refunds for anybody who actually wants the refunds. And then, and this is where it gets fascinating, we got an unvalidated, machine-translated and alleged to be leaked from the fantastic Telegram and Russian social media service VK that purports to show the game having having a 46% refund rate before the closure was announced. Now, this is certainly a very, very interesting thing. Look, on refund rates in Steam, and we've published the game on Steam, and I think we were in the middle 4% was the refund rate for The Pale Beyond. And broadly speaking, most refunds that you get are because the game's just not really what somebody sort of wanted out of the experience. And within 2 hours, they're like, well, I know I don't want this. And it's actually a really good feature of Steam. In my view, as a developer, it's a good feature. I know a lot of developers are quite suspicious of, oh, if I have a short game, people can just play it and refund a bunch of it. And I do understand that concern. But for me, the benefit is it basically de-risks a customer actually trying a game, because in a way, it can sort of just be at worst case, like a 90-minute trial or something like that. So I do think this system in Steam is fantastic. Now, as for how Steam refunds work, on your Steam backend, you get a few different numbers, right? You'll get a big number at the top, which is your gross income. Now, that is basically all of the money I believe in US dollars that your game has generated. And that is before anything else happens. What happens after that? Well, less refunds, chargebacks, and taxes. And it is common knowledge that those things, for an average game with a reasonable refund rate, you're going to get about 85% of your gross revenue as your net revenue on Steam. Now, from that 85%, from that pot of money, then Valve takes 30%, and then the rest of that goes to your publisher. And from that point, it's whatever deal you and your publisher have with each other. As an example, in some deals, the way that it works is, the developer gets a trickle of money while they pay back their development budget to their publisher. And then when they've paid their publisher back, they, get a hell of a lot more of a split, right? Because they've paid their thing off. I've seen other examples where a developer will get absolutely no money until they have fully paid back their recoup. So they fully pay back their production budget, and then after that, you maybe are looking at like a 50-50 split or something like that. I've seen many different deals. That's kind of how those things will feel. In this situation, okay, number one, this all does look real. This does look like a real screenshot. Obviously, these things can be pretty easily, faked. These numbers do make a lot of sense to me. As for these refunds, right, 91,000 refunds, think of what that will do to, the difference between the gross revenue and the net revenue here is going to be absolutely goddamn gargantuan, where for most developers that ends up being, your net is about 85 of your gross, 85%. You are going to be looking at something far more cataclysmic here. And that actually does mean that, there is really not that much money coming out of this game. If you're wondering what those 1,071 lifetime retail units would be, that's basically just any code redemptions. So a code redemption will count as retail. If you've given out copies of your game to reviewers or, internal copies sometimes even, those will come up as retail units. Overall then, what this means, 110,000 sales, if that is overall what they have got here from, their lifetime of, 201, you got to think about all of the, chargebacks, taxes that then erodes all of that. But basically the point here is, as soon as the word got out, you see that refund rate of, 46%, that will at this point only increase as the word gets out. So whenever they say this is a financial failure, certainly if they have any form of normal agreement with their publisher, there is no way this developer is basically seeing a penny from any of this, because of just how the cold numbers work. Now, that would back up their public statements where they've said that they have received $0 and they will receive nothing from the day before sales, because they're not actually paid by Steam. So anything going on in Steam there, that will be basically hooked into their publisher. They will then be paid by their publisher. Usually that ends up happening like net 45 terms or something like that. So, by the end of 1 month, wait like 45 days, and that's probably when you'll get the actual money in. So when you think about them having to pay off 5 years of development for their team, and everything else, No. This is the way to think about this, it is basically the most fumbled bag you can essentially imagine. So yes, the game has now been pulled from Steam entirely, so yeah, they will be getting no money from this. The changelogs on SteamDB show a variety of conflicting changes on the project, including who even owns the damn thing, which certainly suggests something. I've got to imagine that is just things being moved around between the Steam accounts of themselves and their publisher. Some weird stuff is also happening to Prop Night, and there's also changes that have happened to the Wild 8, but that should be noted, that's a game that was sold to other original team members that are basically from the pre-Fantastic founding era, so basically it shouldn't really be associated with this stuff. In addition to this, the Discord server has been completely gutted of text and voice channels, but not before there was a final message from some rebelling moderators. Moderator, volunteer, I think as Fantastic would have called them. Last goodbye, FN, so Fantastic fumbled and tried to use us as a scapegoat. One day someone will make the game we all desire. Very much there were mistruths going on. Looking at Fantastic, you see absolutely, there's no content there, and I think IGN decided it was time to have some fun. Not only are they the people who are still hosting the versions of this game where you did have your Splintires like open world style gameplay, no, they published their 1 out of 10 unbearable review. And that leads us to the question of, is this a scam? One thing, it's not clear 100% what's going on here, but what we can do is establish some key facts in the situation. To kick off, Fantastic are an 8-year-old development studio, and broadly they have survived by taking on some popular genres, making a sort of indie spin on those genres, and keeping things small and cheap. The Day Before is their first large-scale game. Before that, they did things like Prop Night. Matona, then, they are an 11-year-old mobile game publisher who have got a publishing history of multiple games outside of Fantastic, and they have seemingly a very close relationship with Fantastic as a result of Prop Night working out, and The Day Before being a scope or project that likely involved both of those companies making a fairly large bet together. And then there's Matona Fantastic, which is a joint venture between the two, and looking at everything, it basically seems like that joint venture exists to manage the Day Before's IP. Now, currently, Matona are not shutting down, and, they're still sort of a named party in all of this stuff, and seemingly they are the people who have bankrolled this entire situation, and they are working with Steam on providing refunds. So the current situation then is quite interesting. Usually the way that this works, right, is you see if you get refunds on Steam, but you still have sales that Steam is yet to pay out, your refund will just come out of those sales. That is, of course, how our gross sales number turns into our net sales number. That then it's that net number that Valve takes their 30% off, and then the 70 goes to you and your publisher. So if the game is basically dead within 4 days, obviously those sales, I don't exactly know what goes on with those sales other than I suppose the companies themselves just get together and work out what to do with this. Obviously, a lot of that money has changed hands, and that, I assume, is now all going to need to go back. One thing that will be unfortunate here is the actual, the sort of total amount of money throughput all of this with, 200,000 actual purchases being made. That's a fair amount of money in payment processing fees and that sort of thing that I suppose usually Valve just eats, I think. I think they do just actually see that as a cost of doing business. Certainly then today is going to represent one of those more costly days of doing business. Because of all that, though, I think there's just about no way that Fantastic are seeing any money here. Literally, the money wouldn't be going to them until, let's just say, 45 days after the end of December. That's probably when they would, unless they were given a cash advance by their publisher or something, a cash advance on their earnings, that's when they would first be receiving money from this. I suppose the way where you could call this some sort of scam is if you had a situation where scam, that's kind of a big word, I suppose. If you had a situation where for 5 years, core management of this company were pretty much just enriching themselves while sort of messing up, because hey, look, if things are messing up, don't be enriching yourself. But if they were just sort of enriching themselves, off this money and off this hype, and they have been able to squirrel away loads of that development budget, maybe because of super high salaries or something like that to executives at the company, then I don't know what the formal definitions of those things are, but I think it's definitely something that people would frown on. If anything, you're going to be looking at something like that going on. if you really want to know what's going on here, I mean, Fantastic themselves, I mean, they've just said this is our first big experience, shit happens. That could be very true. I do sort of have concerns, though. Like, I think about the amount of communication issues publicly that have surrounded this game. I then have got to wonder with Matona, how much did they know about all of this? Were they misled about this? What does this development process actually look like? And I think because of that, right, they keep on, you know, they were talking up this volunteer mentality about the company culture and everything. But if, you know, if they've very much went against that, then I think, you know, people will likely be rather leaky to the press, especially because this is such a high profile story. So there you go. 5 days after the day before, that is the situation that we are all at. Now you're fully up to date on what's going on. We will do our best to provide some, you know, analysis if we actually do begin to find out more from, you know, just more from the sources here. And I hope that having a little bit of experience with, you know, publishers and Steam backends, that's, I don't know, be able to help make some of this, you know, make a little bit more sense for everybody. Yeah, rough situation though. Absolutely, absolutely sucks. Especially, I mean, most importantly, because look, it does seem that nobody's really losing money from this because all the refunds are going to happen. It's just one of those things, like, a lot of time. And it's a big, I don't want to call it a Sean Murray situation, because obviously Hello Games, you know, they were able to crawl themselves out of this one. Like, their refund rate was obviously not something insane like this, you know, when it came to No Man's Sky. Or whatever it was, they had the financial runway to actually be able to fix their game. Whereas here, I think it is just a full-on endless black hole. This is literally, just literally goddamn impossible. But yeah, for me, the big lesson is cool prototypes are one thing. The thing that matters the most, though, is what is an actual full game design that you can produce. And ultimately here, I think we have probably a situation of endless pre-production and endless making things until at some point it's far too late in the day and everybody decides we should probably ensure all these things come together to be a video game. At which point you have this completion sort of urgency being the forcing function to make there actually be a game that can be sold. We got the minimum thing that they were able to dredge up from all of those years of work. And that minimum was nowhere near good enough because they marketed based on all their cool shiny things, but not actually what they could deliver across the whole scope of a goddamn video game. That is I mean, that's how to not do it. There you go. That's the tech tip of today. And that's it for today's video. If you'd like to support us more, then, you know, we're trying to get up to that 1%. I think we're currently at the 0.125%, I believe, of, you know, viewer support over on our own platform on bellular.ghost.io, which, you know, we're doing cool things on. So you can check that out down below. Other than that, I hope I've entertained you for probably 40 minutes. Sorry about that. And with that said, I'll see you next time.